Hi, everybody. Welcome to the May meeting of the combined Boston and Boston Metro West chapters of Citizens Climate Lobby. It's my honor tonight to introduce Dr. Juliette Rooney-Varga, who's an expert on climate change and sustainability. She's a professor of environmental science at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, is the founding director of the school's climate change initiative that informs and supports evidence-based climate action, and is a co-director of the Rist Institute for Sustainability and Energy, which supports hands-on research and sustainability, climate change, and renewable energy. Dr. Rooney-Varga will be talking to us this evening about her research on the impact interactive simulations can have in building consensus for ambitious, evidence-based climate action across political communities. Dr. Rooney-Varga, thanks for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Great, thanks. So just
How to do that.
feels like we're a pretty small group tonight, which is nice because we can have a conversation, I think. So if I would just extend that invitation of let's keep this informal and feel free to stop me and ask questions at any time. I am grateful to be here. I want to congratulate you all on the work that you do. I feel like two things are really impressive to me about what you do. One is that you focus on a price on carbon, which is like, there's so many naysayers to that. And I can't even, there's so many times when I've tried to push for a price on carbon with people who I thought would be like, yay, let's go do it. And even like the most ardent, sophisticated climate activists, I often get a, nope, that's too complicated, whatever. So I feel like, congratulations. Thank you for doing that work. I think it's really important. And then of course, the other thing that you do in terms of being sort of staunchly bipartisan, which just seems like it's increasingly difficult, sadly, to do, but also increasingly important. So just want to take a moment to thank you for both of those things and say how impressed I am with that approach and that work, and eager to learn from you as much as I hope I can share some of the things that we've learned with you. So just put that out there. And I also thought I would take a little bit of time to give you a little bit of background, since we're all in Massachusetts, even though we're just little, squares on Zoom that could be anywhere in the world. Could be tuning in from anywhere in the world. In reality, we're all from or working in Massachusetts. And I think that means especially that it's important that you know about us. I'm really tired at this point of hearing from people that the University of Massachusetts at Lowell's sustainability efforts are like the best kept secret. We don't want that to be true. We want us to not be the best kept secret. So I'm going to give you a little bit of background about who we are, and I'll just grab this slide so you can see, but I'm not like wed to working with slides tonight. If you want to talk instead, I can put the slides away. But let me just, for the sake of having a little bit of supporting material. So as Gary mentioned, I direct the climate change initiative at UMass Lowell, and I also co-direct our new Rist Institute for Sustainability and Energy. So just the first most important thing is that this serves, I hope, as an invitation to reach out to us and see us as a resource, give you a little bit of background about who we are and what I'm going to do tonight. So my thought for tonight was to give you an introduction to ourselves and then share a little bit about my own group and research approach to climate change and energy policy communication, and lay out the challenge, why, how we use simulations to help people learn for themselves, enable people to learn for themselves about these things, and then why we need to go beyond knowledge and engage really emotion, hearts, and why we need to engage social dynamics of decision-making, social forces of learning. So spurring collective action through simulated collective efficacy is how I'm talking about that, and I'll explain that soon. And then just open it up for Q&A. So first, a little bit about us. In case you didn't know, UMass Lowell is the highest ranked university in Massachusetts in sustainability. So I'm just going to say it because I have a research affiliate position at MIT. We're better than MIT, okay? So just putting that out there. And we're one of actually the highest in the country. We currently have gold ASHE stars rating, and we're very close to platinum. There's only about 10 institutions worldwide that have that platinum status. So just to give you an idea that even though we're kind of on a shoestring in terms of often not having as many resources as I would like to share our story and support in faculty and sharing our story. We have a compelling story, I think, to share, including the fact that we have over 90 faculty members collaborating on climate change and sustainability. The climate change initiative that I lead crosses 20 different academic departments, literally from art to atmospheric physics, engineering, health, business, like everything in between. So again, invitation to see us as a resource. And then we have a new Center for Renewable Energy, which we're actually in the top 10 or so nationwide for renewable energy engineering. And that is about 50, actually more than 50 faculty members. I think it's about 80 now, focused on really innovation in renewable energy technology space. For those, I actually live in Somerville, which is where I'm talking to you from right now. And here in Somerville is the Green Tech Labs, and we have a collaboration with them as well. So I'll just mention, keep on plugging through some of this. The other thing that's kind of interesting to us is that this is a map. So we're historically 2 campuses that merged, and now we are an urban campus that is dispersed around Lowell and really literally embedded in environmental justice communities. So here in dark blue are our buildings. And then in yellow, green, so green is minority and income-based environmental justice communities. Yellow is just minority. Pink is minority and English isolation. So you get the idea. It's like basically 100% environmental justice groups that are around us. And so we see that as an advantage. We actually are looking to use our campus and our community as a living lab for climate action that lifts everybody up. And we really don't see how we can achieve our net zero goals without bringing our community with us. So that's a key part of our approach. Another thing I'll mention is that we are a public research university. And so we're also, as one of the largest facilities that the state owns, or is under the state's purview, we're also among the largest emitters. And so we have goals to achieve net zero emissions, but the state has an incentive for us to do innovative projects to reach those goals, because without us reaching our goals, they're not going to reach their goals. So the state has a commitment to lead by example. In other words, for the state facilities, state-owned facilities, to reach net zero emissions prior to the entire community-wide net zero emissions that that Massachusetts has as a goal. So again, we see that as an advantage. I'll just plow right through this. We see that as an advantage because we have an opportunity to do some innovative projects and actually have been very successful in achieving, in getting state funding to do that work. And our primary focus has been on energy efficiency, actually, which has so far been very successful in reducing our footprint and saving money. So I'll just pause for a moment and ask if you have any questions or thoughts about where we're at, and yeah, before I dive into a little bit more of my own work. And feel free to drop things in the chat too. We'll see, maybe I've already missed something. Yeah. Yeah, Mark.
I do have a question about this recognition that you have nationally about sustainability.
Yeah.
Which label is that exactly? And does it speak to weak sustainability, strong sustainability, or how? I mean, what are the criteria in general?
Yeah. So the rating that I'm referring to, well, actually, we've got several ratings. So we've been rated by back in 2007, UMass system-wide committed to the Second Nature program, if you're familiar with it, which is it's like, I'll probably get it wrong, but it's basically like a university and college president's climate commitment, where we were among the first higher ed institutions to commit to net zero emissions. Frankly, at that point in time, we really didn't know how we would achieve it, but it was a goal that we were willing to put in front of ourselves. The rating of us being #1 in Massachusetts is from ASHE Stars. So that's the Association for the Advancement of Sustainability in Higher Education. It's an international program where institutions submit a lot of metrics. So it cuts across our facilities, our operations, and our climate action sort of on the ground, all the way to academic programs, research, innovation, partnerships. And then we've also been ranked among the top 15 to 20 schools by Sierra Club and Princeton Review Green Schools nationwide. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, very good. It speaks to an interest I have in general with metrics used in ESGs, and I just wanted to. I was not aware of that in higher ed.
Yeah. The ESG thing is a whole other conversation, right? And one that deserves a lot of attention, I think, because yeah, it's raising, I don't know, it's definitely raising a lot of questions for me.
But go UMass.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's how we see it. I think, again, like we often don't have the resources to tell that story, and that's just a huge frustration for me, frankly, but we're working on it. So I'll just, any other questions or thoughts? Okay, well, feel free to chime in anytime. I mean, I guess just to kind of wrap up that section, I like this last statement, sort of like, as I've been saying, I mean, I think we really see our campus, our community, and climate action as a living lab, all the way to putting our students' ideas into action as part of our climate action plan. And as I mentioned, leveraging our place in the Commonwealth as a public research university with a mandate to lead by example. And then this last piece of working to create blueprints for climate action that are centered in urban environmental justice communities that are scalable. So that's kind of the really the take-home message of what the Rist Institute is all about. And I think another piece that we're all about is partnerships. And we know we're never going to get any of this work done without partnerships with other organizations. And so, for me, that's a real motivation to talk to you all tonight, is because we're not trying to do this alone, right? There's no point in trying to do this work alone. We need to work together to achieve the outcomes that we all want. And so we're all about collaboration and partnerships with other organizations. Okay, and then also the last thing I'll mention about us is, like, we're really, I think, a unique, or at least I'm hearing a lot of other higher ed institutions sort of like, how are you doing that? Because it seems pretty unique. We're taking two academic organizations, the Climate Change Initiative and our Center for Renewable Energy, and our facilities, our sustainability facilities that are on the ground. All three of those pillars are combined into this one thing, the Rist Institute. So that is something that is, again, unusual. It's like informing action through, it's really, it goes multiple ways. I think of it as a complex system, maybe because I'm into system dynamics. And we're really trying to feed off of each other and do all of those jobs better than we would do in isolation. Okay, there's how you can get in touch with us, and I will drop those in the chat as well, I guess, before we're done. But @SustainableUML is the way to follow us on social media, which we would love if you do. All right, so then for what I wanted to share with you about our research tonight, I don't think I need to tell this group that we need climate change communication that motivates science-based action, right? Like, that's kind of what you're all about, right? So I don't need to tell you that, but I think at this point, like, we really need climate change communication that motivates science-based action, like, as soon as possible and as effectively as possible and at scale. So again, that invitation to work together. And at this point, like post COP26, post Scotland, Glasgow, I'm really thinking about this as like a story of 4 gaps, right? Our climate change problem is like a story of 4 gaps. We have, and these gaps I'm sure are really familiar, I'm guessing are really familiar to you, but feel free to raise your hand if anything's not familiar to you. We've got the emissions gap, right? The gap between what we need to be doing and what we're actually doing in terms of just CO2 equivalents emitted to the atmosphere per year. So a huge gap there. We've got the consensus gap, which is the gap between the consensus among scientists that climate change is real and caused by human activity versus the percentage of Americans that believe in the public that believe that that's true. So that's, we're all about closing that gap here. Well, we're all about closing all of these gaps. Sadly, there's a political gap, which is again why I'm clapping my hands at you that, we all need to be working across the aisle. But in the United States today, the strongest predictor of one's climate change beliefs and actions and attitudes is one's sociopolitical values. And that I don't see why this is like, it's just, that's the way it is right now. And we have to live with that reality and find ways to overcome it, because obviously all of us have kids, all of us care about our world, I hope. It's just that we've taken to using this issue as a way to define our social identities. And that is an unfortunate reality that makes it harder to communicate about this issue. And then I'd say post Glasgow, there's also this kind of credibility gap that I don't have an image for right now, but it's basically like, it brings me back to the ESG comment that was raised by Mark a bit ago. It's like, okay, if we were going to believe some of what we're hearing, then something like 90% of the global economy is covered by net zero pledges, but emissions keep on going up. So what's going on, right? And so I think that this, I think, is a place where we're really going to be needing to push hard in the coming years, is what are people and organizations and governments saying they're doing versus what are they actually doing, and is there a credibility problem? So if we want to close these gaps, we need to give people not just information, but information that leads to action. And I think you're probably familiar with what I'll call the information deficit model, or maybe you've heard about it. I don't know how many people have maybe like this idea that like all we have to do is give people information in an accessible, easy way. And if we do that, then they'll learn. And if they learn, they'll take action. And sorry, this red negative shouldn't be there. That's connected to another arrow, so it's in the wrong place. So just ignore that. So this is where the red comes in. So we can answer like, well, what's the problem? So if this were true, right? If this were true, we would have taken action long ago, and those 4 gaps wouldn't be there. So some people think that it's too complex, and so people can't learn about this problem because it's just like really complex and abstract, and that's a hindrance, or that's a barrier to learning. Another one is prior misconceptions. Like, we're not blank slates. We come to this issue with prior ideas about it, and those ideas can be wrong sometimes or misguided and create barriers to learning. This is a big one here in the US, which is, I'm not going to learn because learning this information would threaten my worldview, right? So like, I believe in X, Y, and Z. And if I also believe in climate change being caused by human activity, then I can't square that with believing X, Y, and Z. And that's a big problem. And I would argue maybe an even bigger but related problem is my social group doesn't agree with this being a problem, or with climate change, human caused climate change. And therefore I can't, if I learn this, it's not rational for me to learn this, because if I do, then I will experience social dissonance with the people that I care about. And research shows that experiencing social dissonance actually causes the same physiological processes as experiencing physical pain. And so who in their right mind would want to subject themselves to physical pain, right? Or an inflammation response or that kind of a thing. And then the last thing that sadly I'm seeing a lot in my classrooms with young people today is like, why should I bother? Like, we're not going to act, we're not going to take action. So let's just like throw up my hands and not bother engaging with this issue because it's hopeless and we can't or won't act. Okay, so this is a lot of barriers and we want to know how to get over them, right? And so I guess I'll stop and ask, how many of you all, can you raise your hand or drop something in the chat or unmute yourself? Have you experienced or worked with the NRoads or C-Roads simulators? Okay. So let me just see. So
we have a couple experts on the call, I think.
Yeah, that's awesome. I might be reaching out to you because sometimes I need some help. So like, all right, our question is, how do we get to the climate future that we want with all these barriers? And we know that a lot of the ways that we've been using don't work, right? Research shows that showing people research doesn't work. That's one of my favorite quotes from my close collaborator and colleague friend, John Sturman at MIT. Research also shows that telling people what to think, feel, or do doesn't work. Like if oftentimes like the emotional appeals that climate activists try to put out there backfire or, are not effective. Sometimes they lead to misunderstanding that kind of leads people to action, but not necessarily evidence-based action, like not necessarily effective action. So I think that's another issue, that's a problem. And then another one is that there's no point in me really telling any of you what to think, do, or feel, because I'm not the world's expert on the action that you can take, right? We're each our own expert. We're each the world's expert on the actions that each one of us can take. And so I think leaving that up to individuals is really important. So what we do is develop and use these simulation-based approaches like NRoads that you're familiar with, or many of you familiar with, that enable people to learn and feel for themselves. And I guess I'll just say, so I asked you how many people are familiar with NRoads. How many people have done the climate action simulation, the game, or the world climate simulation, the game that's around C-Roads? Yeah. Zach has? No? Okay. So part of what we've done is we've built, in collaboration with the MIT Sustainability Initiative and with Climate Interactive, our group has built these kind of serious games, role-playing games, around these interactive computer models. And I have a slide to explain that, so I can just pull that up. But the idea is through the computer model to put the best available science into people's hands in an interactive way, but to also create a social experience that delivers an emotional response and is done with other people so that we can overcome some of those barriers that are not really about thinking. They're about feeling and having a social group that is going through that with you. For somebody who's done the climate action simulation, Zach, was that you? Don't want to put you on the spot, but how'd it go? Or can you explain, do you remember anything about it?
So I did one, oh, actually one moment. Oh yeah, I can, am I audible?
Yeah.
Okay, so I did one some time ago, and I'm not sure if it's the one that's being referenced here, but
Yep.
I did find that it was really interesting to know that the even for me as someone who does research into this sort of thing on at least somewhat regularly, I was surprised to find that the approach that I would have taken as an individual is still not the most effective. And so the simulation that I had taken went into how the social aspects of how society perceives these types of things are just as important as the technological solutions that we're using, that we develop to begin to bring these things out, like out. So the perception of it is really important, and how this sort of human element plays in was something that I guess I didn't think about. I kind of assumed that it was a technological problem to solve. I'm an engineer, so I think about it that way.
That's
And
great.
I thought it was very interesting. So it was actually very eye-opening for me to do that.
That's great. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, what you're saying kind of reminds me, a while back, I ran a simulation at the American Geophysical Union's general meeting, their fall meeting, which is the largest earth and climate science meeting in the world. It's 25,000 people. Like so I ran a simulation with a bunch of climate scientists there, and I thought like I would walk in the room and within 2 minutes they would solve the whole thing and would go home and it'd be a really boring night. And they fought with each other tooth and nail and fried the planet. and before they ultimately like got to an agreement where they and really like, if you're like me and you've been in climate science for a long time, like you go to these meetings year after year, and like over the decades, the frustration in the conference is like amongst the scientists is like palpable. They're just so frustrated that humankind is not listening to them.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that they didn't understand the social dynamics of decision making, and they needed to go through that experience of a simulation to realize that, oh, that's actually really complicated too. So it was kind of an eye-opening experience, I think, for them too. So I guess I'll just mention there are two simulations I'll be talking about. One is World Climate Simulation, which is basically a role play of the Conference of Parties of the UN climate negotiations. And the climate action simulation is simulating a summit of experts coming together to advise governments on a roadmap to achieve the Paris Climate Agreement goals, 1.5 to 2 degrees C rise. So the idea is to have this interactive role play along with the computer model. So here's just a screenshot of the NRoads computer model. I'm not going to dive into this right now, other than to say that it's really easy to, these are all policy levers, including a price on carbon, which is a really powerful one. And it's very easy to use the model, and I'm happy to show it to you if you'd like to see it live. But it makes it possible to find out in an interactive with immediate feedback way how pulling on these different levers influences our global energy supply mix, greenhouse gas emissions, and ultimately temperature by 2100, and has many, many different policy choices, but also impacts and sort of science components embedded in it. It's really fun to explore. Oops. So one second, okay. So also just put it out there that we're working really hard to get this model out to high-level decision makers. So we have by now reached over 140 bipartisan elected members of Congress. So both sides of the aisle, business leaders across multiple industries. We've reached staffers of elected officials. We've reached over 200 people that are leaders in nonprofit and think tank and foundation sectors. And I think at this point, we're at about 85,000 participants worldwide in 95 countries. This is a couple months old, the slide, so it's growing fast. John Kerry is a user of our tool, has called it a climate crisis game changer for policymakers and people across the country, as have business leaders such as Jim Snabe and others. So I guess one of the reasons that I say that is like you're interacting with policymakers, and we're really interested to learn from you and find out what you learn from that, and also to give you this tool to do it in a way that we think is really effective. So if you do interact with policymakers, I guess I would ask, and especially if you use NRoads to do it, we would really appreciate it if you let us know. One of the things that we're doing with a project right now with MIT and Climate Interactive is looking at what impact, if any, that experience has on their public sphere communication, their actions in commerce, et cetera. So please let us know. Okay, so really what I'm going to do here is just give you a very high level overview of some of the key findings from our last 3 papers. So you can dive into each one of these in a lot more detail by reading the papers or asking questions. And I'll just skip right over this. So one of the first ones that we looked at, where we really dove into what's driving, or what are the things that people take away from these simulations. And we looked at over 2,000 people in 8 different countries on 4 continents who experienced the world climate simulation. We found that they had a significant gain in their knowledge about climate change, but importantly, they also gained a sense of urgency. And those 2 things were related to each other. In other words, if people had a bigger gain in knowledge, they also had a bigger gain in a sense of urgency, and vice versa. And there was a statistically significant relationship between those 2 things. So this is important because it's saying that there is an emotional response that's actually grounded in science. It's grounded in evidence, which to us, as a scientist, that's exciting to me. But the thing that was kind of like maybe a bummer to me as a scientist, but kind of one of those duh moments for a psychologist, is that the knowledge, we found no statistically significant interaction between gains in knowledge and gains in intent to take action. There was only, so there's no line here between these 2 things, because it didn't exist. There was no statistically significant relationship. What drives action is emotion, urgency, and a little bit, to a lesser extent, hope. So we found that people had a greater sense of urgency, but they also had a greater sense of hope from the simulation. And those 2 things are what matter, especially urgency is central to driving action. And again, that's like a psychologist, duh moment, but to a scientist, I'm like, what? They're not, they're not using the information. And the same thing was true with desire to learn more. So people wanted to do and learn more if they had a greater sense of urgency. So that was kind of important, right? That this speaks to that hearts and mind piece. We're not just changing minds, we're changing hearts. I'd also mention that these gains in knowledge, urgency, intent to take action, and desire to learn more were found not just among your classic liberal population, but also among Americans who did not believe in government interference in government regulation or government interference in their personal lives. So some evidence that we're reaching across the political divide a little bit, which is exciting. We then wanted to ask, because in the US, sociopolitical worldview, like sociopolitical values, are the most important driver of climate change beliefs, based on the data that are out there. We wanted to ask whether sociopolitical values in the US influenced these outcomes, and also whether we could influence, whether the world climate simulation interacted with sociopolitical values or affected them. And so with that, I don't have a summary of the findings here, because it would, I'm happy to bring them up, but it would cause me to dive into quite a bit of detail to explain it to you. And I don't think we have time for that. But the take-home message from this work, which is published, you're welcome to check out the paper. The take-home message was that we found, as others have, that sociopolitical value is a major driver of pre-simulation beliefs and attitudes, so knowledge, urgency, hope, and intent to act. But that actually it was people who hold a more individualistic hierarchical worldview, in other words, really conservative worldview, as opposed to what's called communitarian egalitarian, or more progressive or liberal worldview. So there's a more conservative worldview, which is also associated, sadly, with dismissal of human-caused climate change in the US. Actually, that population showed greater gains in urgency than the more liberal population, because they started from a lower place and they had more to grow, and they ended up pretty close to the liberal, the communitarian egalitarian group. So there was an interaction there between sociopolitical values and gains from the simulation. And the other thing that I'll mention is that we interestingly also saw a shift from this individualistic hierarchical worldview. So people who started off like on the more extreme side of that within our population moved to the middle or towards the middle in terms of their sociopolitical values, which we thought was really interesting. I don't know if this stuck. So that's one of the things we're interested in looking at, is whether it sticks over a longer time. Here, this is research from a graduate student of mine, also recently published. I don't want to bore you. I don't want to dive too far into this. I know it's a lot on the slide, but here she looked at qualitative analysis, so looking at interviews with people who had experienced the simulation. And this is the thing that I want to point out. So we've already talked about learning and a sense of urgency through risk perception and that motivating action. That just confirmed the findings that we had from our other work. But this is the thing that's important. People who went through the simulation, they experienced this working together, deliberating with each other, having conversations about climate change, and they could only get to the outcome that they want. They could only win the game if they worked together. So that delivered a sense of what we call collective efficacy, feeling like as a group they could achieve something that they couldn't achieve alone. Of course, it's fake, right? It was just a simulation. They weren't solving any real problems. They were just trying to get the computer to give the outcome that we all wanted, to meet the climate goals. But even this fake simulated collective efficacy, and I just really hate the word fake, simulated collective efficacy increased their motivation and led to action in the real world. And I think that that's something else that you all could probably relate to, because you're part of what I would say is the social movement, right? You're a part of a collective action group. And what the research shows about social movements, the sociology research, is that people who experience collective efficacy experience the fact that you can get more done together, or sometimes you can get things done together that there's no way to achieve alone, are willing to invest their energy into collective action. So it's kind of like that movement building thing of like small wins can lead to bigger wins. You need to have those wins along the way, right? To give people a sense that it's worth it to keep on putting effort into that collective action. Okay, so I guess I'll just wrap up by saying that we find that simulated experiences can overcome these barriers to learning about climate change and even shift people's worldview, helping to build consensus and depolarize the issue, which is obviously really important today. You need to have things like credible expert information, which you have through the computer model. You have this active learning. You're not telling people what to think, do, or feel. They're coming to it themselves. It's intrinsic. It's a facilitated experience, but there's no single messenger. All of the people who are involved are messengers to each other. And there's a shared goal. It's kind of like what we saw at UMass when our president said, we're going to have this goal of net zero emissions, and I have no idea how we're going to get there, but now that's your goal. How are you going to get there? And I was shocked because the thing that shocked me was that people who didn't care about climate change before that day all of a sudden cared about how we were going to get that goal done, which was, to me, that was an eye-opener. And then the last thing is simulated collective efficacy can lead to real-world collective action. And so I'll wrap there and just, open to any questions if you have.
Juliette, thank you so much. I really enjoyed the second half of this talk about the findings. And I'll certainly bring those to the attention of our national organization and perhaps have you speak with them as well. We just have time for one question, and I'm going to take the privilege of asking it. Our national organization is looking at what our next policy goal will be. you know, we've been focused on a revenue neutral carbon price for the last 13 years. We hope that that effort is coming to some sort of a conclusion or an interim waypoint or something like that. And we're actively involved in discussions to try to figure out what's the next best thing that we could do for climate change if we had a price on carbon. And I wanted to ask you that question. You know, assuming we had carbon pricing, what can we do? What is the next best thing that you would recommend we take on as a national goal?
Okay, that's an interesting question. I was thinking that you were going to ask, what do we do if we can't get a price on carbon?
No, that's a given.
I was going to suggest performance standards or RPS. Yeah, I think that what's powerful about a price on carbon is that it exerts a downward pressure on carbon emission on fossil fuels, which is critical for any, we're not going to achieve our goals unless we have that. So I think thinking about, so there, you know, the reality is like there is no, as my colleague at Climate Interactive says all the time, there's no silver bullet, there's no one thing. We're at a point now where we need to push really hard on many things. So, I mean, even a carbon price is not the one thing. So I think that in my head, at least, you know, energy efficiency is a big one. It's one of those win-win-win things. So like if you insulate your, you know, retrofit, insulate your home, you're tackling a tough issue because buildings have a very slow turnover rate. So we're going to be stuck with the building stock that we have for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And you're saving people money, you're making their homes more comfortable, and you're creating a form of energy storage, right? So I think that that's a big one, but I don't want to really, you know, say like that's the one next best thing, because we're really not in a place where there is one next best thing. We're in a place where we need to push really hard on a lot of things at the same time.
Sure. Okay. Thank you so much for your time. This was really great. Really enjoyed the whole talk. And again, if you wanted to hang on and see how we conduct our meetings, you're welcome to. And I'm sure we're going to be back in touch to talk about future opportunities for more engagement. So thank you.
And Allison is putting in the chat. Yeah, Republican college students, I think, and probably suburban women, I would imagine too. I know that those are two audiences that that Republicans are hearing are, you know, care a lot about this issue. Sure. And they need to address. Yeah, okay. And I dropped in the chat too, we're in the process of transitioning our website, but for now that'll work. That link has all of those publications linked out from it if you want to check them out.
Okay, thanks again.
Okay, take care.
Bye now.
Bye.